15. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the storytelling conference. My name's Neil. I'm a manager in the pharmaceutical industry. I've been in the industry 40 years coming up this November. My story is very much about my journey through the pharmaceutical industry from sales rep, field trainer, up to senior manager. Along the way, I've encountered a huge number of different selling models and been on the receiving end of a lot of the training of these selling models. My story is more about the actual practical application of theory and possibly case studies, because a lot of the big management companies produce sales models which they sell to the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry interweave the sales model into the marketing plan or the brand plan. And during an advanced notification stage before you launch a drug, then the sales teams would get trained up and generally around a number of key messages. And according to the sales model, it would be essential to deliver these sales messages as part of the marketing plan or the brand plan. And very often, when companies look back on whether or not the launch was a success or not, they'll examine the delivery of the sales model against a number of KPIs, key performance indicators. So they'll do some market research to see whether or not the sales model and the lines within the sales model, such as, say, 3 key selling messages, or maybe even more, are taken up by the customers. And in the market research, they will ask them questions to see whether or not some of the key words, some of the key statements actually come back from the customers. In other words, was the sales model successful as part of the marketing or brand plan? So my challenge and my story is I've been involved in a case study for about 40 years. I started in the industry in November 1982, and so obviously coming up to 40 years this year. And having delivered and been on the receiving end of a number of demonstrations of these sales models, I'm probably going to challenge them a little bit. And I would say that potentially a lot of the successful sales reps actually have their own interpretation of the sales model and their own interpretation of the key messages. And they deliver them in such a way that it suits their customers. And this is not a psychological approach. And they haven't psychoanalyzed these customers to understand what their learning styles are, or whether they're red or blue or green in terms of an insight profile. What they've done is they've worked hard over the years to understand the customer and understand the environment that the customer exists in, so that they make sure that they bring value to the table. Now, what I mean by this is if you have an interaction with a customer, and it's based on a sales model, I would say that you'd normally have a discussion. As part of a discussion, a process has been delivered or a process has been undertaken. And this discussion tends to involve the customer actually giving you some feedback, some positive feedback, that they will write your a prescription for your drug, or that they will support your campaign. Unfortunately, in the pharmaceutical industry, it doesn't matter how good you are at picking up signals, buy-in signals, ultimately you'll never know whether the customers actually used your drugs until the data comes in. Because obviously there's an interface between the prescriber and the data, and that is a pharmacist up the road who fulfills the script, and then that data goes into a data set which is ultimately picked up by the pharmaceutical industry or sold to the pharmaceutical industry. So they can then backtrack and check whether or not you've been successful or not. So there's a number of things that you have to take into consideration when you're delivering the sales model. It's not just getting the lines across. It's not just getting used to the customer, but ultimately it's striking up a relationship. And as I said, I want to challenge the sales model, because what a sales model effectively makes you do is follow a process. It makes you discuss. The best salespeople have conversations with their customers. And if somebody asked me whether I'd like to discuss something or have a conversation about something, for sure I would always say, I'd rather have a conversation about it. I'd feel more at ease. And I feel that I'd be given enough space to reflect on what you're talking about and also to input my own opinion. And a lot of these sales reps, these very, very successful sales reps, when I've seen them in action, and this is over a 40-year period, what they've done is they've worked hard in the background to understand what the customer needs are and what the customer's environment is, to a point that the conversation actually flows, and it flows really well, because the customer feels you've done your homework and you have really gone out of your way to make sure that the conversation is going to be valuable. So if you can bring value to the table, what you're ultimately doing is satisfying the customer in terms of their needs, but also not wasting their time. So if you can picture a situation where a product is due to launch, a marketing plan is produced, the sales model is introduced, and off you go. You're going out there to create a brand. You rely very heavily on the sales force because the whole thing has come down through a funnel. And the end point is the interface between that salesman, person, saleswoman, and the customer. That interface is so important because that's where the product is going to be sold. So all the bits that are in the funnel, like the regulatory, medical, marketing, sales training, all different aspects that the company goes through to make sure that that product goes out into the field the way they want it to. The end of the funnel is that interface. So my challenge over 40 years is, and it's a big case study, 40 years. I've seen it so many times. I've worked in a number of different companies and I've seen so many different styles and different approaches. But ultimately, I'm absolutely convinced that it's the relationship between the sales rep and the customer that actually gets the sale. And the relationship is not based on key messages. It's actually based on a huge amount of homework and a tremendous amount of information gathering by the sales rep over a period of time prior to them getting in front of the customer. So the way I want you to picture this is that prior to the interaction taking place, a huge amount of information is gathered. That information can be used in two ways. Information is king, as we've always been told, but it can also be the enemy of intelligence. If you haven't got a good relationship with your customer, you'll never be sure that you're bringing the right information to the table. Beyond that, you coordinate your interaction. In other words, you speak to other customers and you bring information to the table and you build up your intelligence bank through conversations to a point that the customer is interested in actually buying from you. So what does that mean? In reality, I would say in the virtual world that we now find ourselves in, it's not just the sales model that's important, it's the relationship. And I would say probably the relationship's more important. We're now finding it harder and harder to get in front of customers, and they've now chosen their platform as a virtual platform. So if you don't work hard on the relationships, then you won't get any information to that customer. It's getting harder, and I feel companies should focus more on relationship building than the sales model. Thank you.